Hi. You've learned that when we have selected a journal article to use in our own writing, that we did a first reading just to decide whether or not the article was right for us. Once we've decided that it's right for us, we do a second reading. And in the second reading, we'll have specific questions that we would like to have answered. So it's a good thing to keep those questions in mind as we read. It will make us a more active reader and we'll have a better understanding of the study. So you have learned that research papers will have an abstract that is an overview of the study. And then once we get into the study itself, it will begin with an introduction. It will explain the methods, the results. There will be a discussion section and a conclusion. And so we should, for each section, have questions in mind for which we want answers to. A good way to become an active reader is to preview the questions, for example, the questions that are on your Cornell notes. That way we have these questions in mind as we read. In this audio reading, I will read the introduction section. What questions do we have in mind? Well, take out your Cornell notes. Come back when you're ready. Welcome back. Okay, so in the introduction, we should look for what the researchers already know. In other words, what prompted them or what encouraged them to do this study. They will have read other experts' opinions or research results, and they'll share that information with us in the introduction. They will also give us some important definitions and some abbreviations. You'll also see some acronyms. What's an acronym? It's when the author will use a capital letter for each word. For example, in this article, we've already learned that ASD stands for Autism Spectrum Disorder. Okay, we'll also find out about what the objectives are of the current study. In other words, what were the researchers trying to find out? Okay, let's begin the reading. Introduction. Autism spectrum disorder is a complex, heterogeneous neurodevelopmental disorder. Heterogeneous, what does that mean? It means many different ways of presenting itself. Neurodevelopmental. Let's break that word up. Neuro. Can you see neuron? Developmental. Okay, adjective form for development. So it's some kind of developmental disorder affecting the neurons. Okay, let's go back now. Autism spectrum disorder, ASD, a complex or complicated, heterogeneous neurodevelopmental disorder, has an estimated prevalence, an estimated rate of approximately 1% in children. ASD is associated with significant genetic risk factors. Significant. This means statistically significant, which means often it is there are some genetic risk factors involved. However, the impact of environmental factors cannot be discounted, cannot be ignored. So the impact, the effect of environmental factors, environmental variables, or things in the environment cannot be ignored. They cannot be discounted. Indeed, epigenetic mechanisms have been implicated, suggesting that gene-environment interactions. That's important here. It's an important idea. So the interaction between genetics and environment are important in mediating risk, are important in lowering the risk of ASD. And we can see source number 1 and number 2 are mentioned here in the superscript. Where do we find those sources if we're interested? We have to go back to the end of the paper to the reference section, and there we can find the first and second source. Let's continue the reading for now. One potential environmental risk factor for ASD is vitamin D deficiency. And we have a acronym, okay? Vitamin D deficiency, VDD. You can see how it was constructed. Okay? So, one possible environmental risk factor for ASD is vitamin D deficiency, or VDD, which affects approximately 1 billion people. There's our third source. While VDD has detrimental, destructive, damaging effects on bone health, recent reports suggest implications or effects for neurological, immune, and inflammatory disorders. We learned previously that ASD is a neurological disorder, so we can begin to see a possible link. If vitamin D affects neurological development and ASD is related to it, can you see the link that the author is trying to make here? Okay, let's go back. So recent reports suggest implications of neurological, immune, and inflammatory disorders due to what is its? Its is referring back to vitamin D. Its unique role in brain homeostasis, keeping the brain stable processes, neurodevelopmental, and immunological modulation processes, and gene regulation. And again, we see the sources. Okay, now we can start to imagine in our minds that possible relationship between the gene regulation, vitamin D deficiency, neurodevelopmental, and autism. So that's what the researchers already know. And how do they know? Well, they're experts, and they've actually cited other experts who have provided that information. Multiple studies have noted inadequate vitamin D intake and or status in children with ASD. Indeed, a 2006 meta-analysis of 11 studies, a meta-analysis, a super-analysis, an analysis that analyzed 11 published studies, which included 870 ASD children and 782 typically developing children. So that was a pretty big analysis. The authors of that study, they analyzed 11 published studies statistically to pull out the main results, the main trends. Okay, what did that meta-analysis conclude or provide findings about? It demonstrated significantly lower, 25-hydroxy vitamin D in ASD compared with the controls. What are the controls again? Controls are children that had developed typically. In other words, they didn't have it. So, what did the researchers already know? Well, they already knew that experts were suggesting vitamin D deficiency might have a link. Okay? You might have to read this a couple times. That's okay. Recent reviews have detailed the associations between vitamin D and autism spectrum disorder. Look, more sources. 4, 5, 6, 7, and 23. There are 4, 5, 6, 7, 23. Those are the numbers of the entries on the reference list if we wanted to read more about it. So here we can see at least 5 published studies drawing this link. Let's continue reading. Vitamin D deficiency has been implicated in the development of ASD symptoms in an animal model. There's another reason, another background knowledge. Low-level evidence based on a single case report, another study. A single case report means where they studied one person deeply. And 2 open-label studies support the role of vitamin D supplementation in autism spectrum disorder. So some researchers have already looked at that link. Additionally, a single double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trial reported benefit of supplementation in ASD. So that's an experimental design. Those researchers, and we can find the source 28, they did an experimental design and they supported using vitamin D. However, any potential mechanisms mediating or helping or influencing a positive effect of vitamin D supplementation in autism spectrum disorder remain obscure, remain a little bit of a mystery, a little bit unknown. Therefore, we wanted to rigorously, very strictly and diligently assess, measure the effects of vitamin D supplementation in ASD. Okay, now, try to read it on your own and fill out your Cornell notes for the introduction section.